Hi there, welcome to Crafting with Lisa Horton YouTube. Today I'm going to be using the new craft stamps with the companion dies by Lisa, the Summer Petunia set. We have 3 stamps in this set. We have the larger flower, the smaller flower, which is a reverse of this one here, and we have the sentiment that says do small things with great love. Today I'll be making a twisted easel card. You can see here we have the detail with the larger Summer Petunia. The detail is cut into the back as well, so this card looks good from all angles. On the inside of the card we have Lisa's pretty floral paper pack. We have the smaller flower decoupaged to use as the stopper for the easel card, like so. We've also used Lisa's brand new sparkle embossing powders on the sentiment here. You can see this is the lovely yellow, which has a gorgeous sparkle within that, and I've stamped and embossed this onto a piece of vellum. So I'll show you how we make this easel card. I'm using my favourite size of card blank, which is a shop bought card blank. Today I'll be using a craft card blank, so I can show you a different colourway. These generally measure just under 6 inches square, which is just about 15 centimetres square, so it's just under, in fact. We want to create the twisted easel card, so we want to score the front of the card blank here. If you have a scoring board, then that will be ideal to use. If you don't, then don't worry, you can always use a stack of paper, a stack of magazines, something with just perhaps just a little bit of give in there, and you can use a ruler. You can use a scoring tool. I'll just show you an example of a scoring tool. So you can use one of these ball tools with a slightly smaller end on, I would say, or you can use a ballpoint pen that the ink has run out of. And you just score from the bottom corner up to from the bottom left corner up to the top right corner, and you would use your ruler and make a score mark right along like so. And the reason you need a little bit of give underneath is just to allow the ball tool just to work and just sort of spread those fibres a little bit, and that will work for you perfectly. If you have a scoring board, then choose a channel that you're going to use. I've got my centre channel marked here with a black line, and I'm going to line up the top right corner with the opposite diagonal, so that's the bottom left. So I shall line up the top right corner, bring the bottom left corner so it's in line on that same one line, and I will just create a score line like so. There we are. And I shall use my scoring tool as a bone folder, and I shall just make sure that's got a really nice crisp fold. If you don't have a folder like this, a bone folder, then you can use the edge of a ruler, preferably not one of these metal rulers, because as you score that, you're likely to just damage the card. If you have a ruler with a bevel on it, that would be perfect to score. Failing that, you can take a credit card or something of the like and just score that a couple of times down, and that will give you a really nice crisp edge, so you get a really nice crisp fold. And you can see we now have the beginnings of our folded or twisted easel card, like so. Now we can concentrate on decorating the front of the card. I have chosen my 2 matten layers like so, and I've already stuck them together. I like quite a thin border, but this is entirely up to you. This is sort of personal preference. So I have that, so I know that that fits the front of my card like so. If you want more of a border to see the card blank around the outside, then obviously you can adjust your measurements like so. But to start with, we just adhere the 2 coloured borders together like this, and you can just see here that I've marked the bottom corner and the top corner there, so I know that this will go on in this way. Next, I've taken the piece of stamping card that will stamp the flower onto, and I've just made sure that we have the same measurements, but I'm not attaching this to the matten layers just yet. I'm going to use my stamping platform. You don't have to at this stage. If you just want to use a stamping block, that's absolutely fine. I'm just going to put my stamping card like so, and I'm going to take the largest of the petunia flowers, the largest of the stamps, and I'm going to position this on this card like so. Now, if you remember that the orientation of the cards, we're going to have the fold from this corner to this corner, and what I want to do is make sure I place my stamp so we have a good portion of the stamp above where this fold would be. So if I bring in my ruler, if you imagine that the twisted easel of the card will run in this direction, and I can see here that I've got the majority of the stamp positioned above that fold. That's good because that's where I want the detailing of this stamp to be. So now I've positioned that right, I can just pick up that stamp, and I'm going to stamp this with a VersaFine smoky grey. I like a paler stamped image, particularly when I am colouring with alcohol markers. So just move this along. I will ink up my stamp. And I will stamp that impression onto my stamping card. See that stamp perfectly. Obviously, the advantage of using a stamping platform and you're using such a large stamp, if there are any areas missed, you can re-ink the stamp, re-ink, and you've got the confidence that that will re-ink into the same position. At this stage, I would actually colour the flower in. I've used alcohol markers for mine, but you can use whichever medium you would like, either watercolour or pencils, or just leave as is. I would then take the die that corresponds to this stamp, and I would just position that in place with a little bit of masking tape and run that through my die cutting machine, where I would end up with a piece like so. And as I say, I have already pre-coloured my flower for you, and you can see that that has already been die cut. Now, as is usually the case when we die cut, we don't always keep the waste, as it were, that has the aperture within it, but this time we do, so don't throw this part away. Obviously this has been pre-measured to fit an matten layer of the card front, of course. Now, to start preparing this for the card front, we can now adhere this aperture to the front of our mat and layers. And what I would say is just make sure to add some glue just around the detailing of the die cut, detailing of the aperture, because you don't want this to lift at a later date. So just a small amount of glue, and say less is more. And we just add that around the aperture. And then we can make sure that we stick this in place. And you can see now why I didn't adhere this stamped layer previously. We wanted to add this once the aperture has been cut from it. So I'll make sure that's all lined up, and we can add that there like so. And we can see now the beginnings of our card front coming together. Now, before we put this onto the card front, what we need to do is actually slice this in half, so we know that each half will sit on each half of the card blank here. So you can either take yourself a craft knife and a ruler and go from corner to corner and cut it in half this way, or if you have a really good trimmer, you'll be able to use your trimmer to do this also. So I'm going to go from the trimmer, and make sure again we go from the same orientation as when we scored the card. So we're going from the bottom left corner and diagonally up to the top right. So I'm lining that up with my cutting edge, and I'm going to slice down. I know that my guillotine is pretty good, so excuse the noise. So we have our base layer like so. Now this is now ready, as you can see, to adhere to each half of the card blank. I'm just making sure that that lines up, because when we adhere this to the card, we want this cut edge to match exactly with the fold of the card blank like so. So that whichever way you find easiest to do this, to line that up. So I think I will actually do this folded. Now I'm just going to double check that I make sure I attach the right half to the right position on the card. So this is the bottom half of the card, and I'm just going to line that up flush with the folded edge of that card like so. Really nice finish along that scored edge. And we'll do exactly the same with this half of the card also. I think initially I'll make sure that I line this up so that the layers are accurate to each other here and here. That will give us a really nice finish to the front of the card. And you can see by doing that we have a really nice line up of the scored and cut edges like that. And you can now see how that design comes together for the folded easel or the twisted easel. Now we want to add our die cut, and you can see, because we've matched up the two corners exactly, that this die cut will sit really nicely within that aperture. To add this die cut to the front of the card, what I will do is actually apply the glue to the card itself, just within the bottom half of the aperture. This way I'll be taking the guesswork out of where to apply the glue onto the back here. We want this lovely detailing of the die cut to appear above the card, so we don't want to sort of contaminate the back of this with any glue. So that means we can just slot that in place, and we know that we're going to have a really nice join for that die cut. And as we pull that up, we can see we can have the detailing that is free of glue on the back, but we have just a really nice detailing and a really nice finish to the back of this twisted easel. Okay, now we can work on the inside of the card, because obviously we need to create a really nice insert and a position to put the stopper for the card. So I've taken some of Lisa's Pretty Florals design paper, and I've matte and layered onto exactly the same colours as I've used on the front here. So we can just apply our glue to the inside of the card, and we can just lay that into the centre like so. So we have a really nice coordinating insert to the front of the card like that. To create the stopper for the card, I have actually stamped the smaller of the two flowers of the Summer Petunias, sorry. So we've actually stamped this in exactly the same way as I did the front floral. I've stamped it in the grey, and I've pre-coloured that in the alcohol markers, and I'm going to add the glue, and I'm going to adhere this flat to the internal insert of the card here. You can, if you wanted, add a 3D element and use 3D foam pads or a glue gel, and that would create a lovely stopper for you. So that would work. Actually, it works like really well like so. But if this bit was 3D, then obviously that would work better for you. But what I have done is actually stamped this flower itself so I can decoupage this part. Now, to stamp this flower, you can use just any piece of small card which you would have actually created when you create your layers for the front of the card. You will find yourself with a small piece of card, which so this will be ideal to make use of them small pieces. So just to stamp this smaller flower, obviously I've mounted this onto a smaller acrylic block. It doesn't matter that the rest of this flower is overlapping that acrylic block. I don't want this detail of the rest of the flower or the rest of this stamp, so I'm just going to ink where that acrylic block is sitting, which incorporates just the flower that I'm interested in, and I can just stamp this onto the small piece of card. That means that I can just colour this flower and fussy cut that out, and we're left with a piece like that. So it's a great way for using up your smaller pieces of card. So I've attached already some 3D foam to the back of this flower. So I can remove the backing. My 3D foam isn't very sticky, so I'm just going to add some dabs of glue just to make sure that I get a proper adhesion, and I can decoupage that to the flower in place like so. So not only does that give a nice little bit of detail to the inside of the card, it's actually functional and allows the twisted easel to stand like that. So now the card is coming together really nicely. We can add the sentiment. I'm actually going to stamp the sentiment, which is from the same stamp set, and I'm going to stamp this in clear embossing ink onto vellum. Because this is going to overlap the detailing of the flower here, I don't want to sort of cover up where I've coloured in. So the fact that I can see through the vellum gives a really nice detail. I'm going to use my stamping platform again for this, because I want to make sure that I have a perfect stamped impression of this sentiment, and to do that I just need to have the confidence that if I need to restamp and just apply a little bit more ink, I know that I can do that with the stamping platform. So I'm just going to position the stamp and the vellum in place, pick up my stamp. Now at this stage, before I stamp, I'm just going to add or use the anti-static pad. This is a brand new one from Lisa Horton. You would have used the anti-static pads before. This one is slightly different. It's made of a slightly different material to before. It's actually cotton, and it releases far less powder each time you use it. It means that you're not overwhelming the page with too much powder, which I find it makes it really useful to use. So I've used the anti-static pad because vellum can be notorious at picking up sort of any moisture from your fingers if you've been handling it. So to get a clear, crisp, stamped impression for when we emboss, we want to make sure that our vellum is as clean as possible. So I'm just stamping, hopefully you can see that. I'm stamping my stamp with the clear embossing ink. We can stamp that down. So just give that a nice impression. And I can see already that that's stamped perfectly. While that's still on the blank, on the black background, hopefully if I'm twisting that, you can just see how well that has stamped. Now I'm just handling the vellum now with the areas that aren't stamped. I'm just going to get myself a piece of copy paper. And I'm just going to turn on my heat tool in the background, so that's heating, sort of preheating. I find that's a really useful tip, particularly when you're using vellum, something that you don't want to use too much heat on. If you're going to use vellum, then I would suggest, if you can, to use a heat resistant vellum, which is usually clearly stated on the packet when you first buy it. Or if you can't find any, a thicker vellum would generally take a bit of heat. And I would say, my one tip would be, if you're using something that isn't stated to be heat resistant, just keep the heat tool a further distance away from the vellum, and you'll find that you will be able to heat it more gentle, and that should work for you. So now hopefully you can see this turn. I'm just going to be patient and just leave that in one place and just heat from underneath, and hopefully you can see that the embossing powder is turning there, and as soon as it turns, it means it's setting. So just gently move that along and don't leave the heat tool or the vellum in any one place for too long. Once you can see it turn, which is actually quite clear once you're using this yourself, you can just move that along and you'll see that has got a great effect. I really love these coloured sparkle embossing powders. It's not often you see a coloured sparkle embossing powder. I can't wait to carry on using the rest of the colours. They come in a set of 4. We have blue, lilac, pink and this lovely yellow. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this Summer Petunia set comes with 3 stamps and 3 dies. So it's great that we have a die that will cut out this sentiment. And that's, I think it's one of Lisa's points of interest, I must admit. She does great sentiments, but she really does make sure that we have a really close fitting die to allow us to cut that out, and it just makes using the sentiments so much easier, so we don't have to worry about fussy cutting them out ourselves. It's just so easy. Fortunately, most of the text stamps that Lisa does with her dies fit through just a desktop die cutting machine there, and you can see, even cutting with vellum, that we get a super precise die cut. Really neat, really crisp, and just perfect to sit on top of our easel card. Now, we do have to be careful when we apply a vellum sentiment to a card, obviously, because we want to make sure that we don't see the adhesive behind. And I'm just going to use just a tape runner to adhere this. You can use really fine red adhesive tape. I do usually have some, but I've run out actually. But then I've found that this tape runner, I can add just small amounts, but this works perfectly and gives me just the right amount of adhesive, which is invisible behind the sentiment there, enabling me to attach that to the front. And you can see now why I wanted to use a vellum sentiment. It means that I can see the detailing of this wonderful floral stamp peeking out from behind. So we can see that this card is coming together. That is a super yellow, which gives us a really great focal point of the sentiment there. Now, just as a finishing touch, I'm going to be using some of Lisa's flatback gems. There's a really pale green which works so well. I'm just going to add a small double glue for each of those. This is a lovely colour and it just adds to the summeriness of the card, I think, like that. There we are. Now, before I leave that there, I just wanted to show you the card made in a couple of other colourways. This was the original card. So I've made a blue, and that yellow just really pops. We have Lisa's pretty floral paper in the background there. So that creates that. Now, if you wanted to have a play around and you have been lucky enough to get some of Lisa's 3D embossing folders, how about embossing the background before you attach this to the card? Before you attach this white layer, where you have the aperture in there, and before you cut it in half to fit onto the twisted easel, you can easily run this through an embossing folder, even with the aperture cut out of it, and I think it adds a really interesting detail, or really, particularly this quilted one here, it adds such a lovely detail to the card. It means you can batch make and make each of the cards look different as you go. So I hope I've been able to tempt you into making an easel card. I really love the fact that we have the detailing of the stamp come out through there, and it gives us a shaped card, quite reminiscent of the edge cut dies that Lisa brought to us in her very first release over a year ago. I think it adds a really lovely detail to the card, and it certainly is like something you'd be drawn to on a mantelpiece. So thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.